Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to revisit a lens that I had first shown in a short on YouTube last year. I had just upgraded from my Sigma 150 to 600 Contemporary, a lens that had been made for the EF mount and I'd been using adapted on my Sony system with the MC11 adapter, also from Sigma. I had just upgraded to the 150 to 600 Sport from Sigma, and that's a native E-mount lens. I haven't made a ton of shorts on YouTube so far, but that one got a lot of views, so I decided it was probably worth revisiting that lens in a longer format. First, I'm going to go over a quick overview of the lens, then we'll look at some videos and photos shot with it, and we'll wrap up with my thoughts on whether this lens represents a good value at its place in the market. In a normal year, I don't get to do much shooting outside this time of year. It's really cold here, everything's iced over, and it looks kind of blah. But we've had a really wild set of weather this winter. We've had weeks where it was freezing one day, and then later in the same week it was in the 70s Fahrenheit. So it's been really weird. But that warmer weather has let me get out and shoot a lot with this lens and get some experience before I did a video. I really liked the Sigma 150 to 600 Contemporary for the price, and I'd gotten it around $1,000, and I think they'd bundled the adapter with it. It was pretty sharp, not the sharpest lens I've ever shot, but pretty sharp considering its price. But one thing that it struggled with when it's adapted to a Sony body, the autofocus wasn't great. Sometimes it just didn't lock, sometimes it struggled. I found it really hard to get consistent results when I was shooting things like birds in flight. When I switched the native E-mount upgrade to the Sport version of that lens, the autofocus is just a ton better. It's really sticky, it works really well. I'd say it's right up there with native lenses as far as how it works with that body. This lens has been out for a little while, so I don't want to go too deep into the specs and bore everybody, but a few things before we move on to sample shots that I think are worth noting. Take a glance down at my notes here. So the Sport version of this lens is a little heavier than the Contemporary version, at about 4.5 pounds to 4 pounds respectively. Despite having a pretty big front element, it does have a front filter. It takes a 95mm filter, and those are quite a bit more expensive if you're used to smaller filter sizes. And for switches on this, a couple of things to note. It does have a manual autofocus switch, which I prefer. It has a focus limiter, so if you know you're taking pictures of things that are farther away, you can limit it to not look in the foreground, which really helps with autofocus speed. And it has a pretty slick zoom tension control, where you can set it to fully locked to keep it closed, or a tighter and looser setting, whether you're going to be zooming and want it to stick in position or be able to be freely moved. Carrying this on long photo walks with a heavier tripod, I was keenly aware of how heavy that whole rig was. I've switched to using a much lighter tripod to keep the weight down, but that, as we'll see in one of my later examples, does have some trade-offs. The 150 to 600 focal length is not uncommon. I even have that equivalent in my Micro Four Thirds system. It's a pretty versatile and popular wildlife focal length. There's a pretty well-traveled saying in wildlife photography that no amount of magnification is enough. On the other hand, a lens manufacturer has to build a lens that is carryable. It can't be super, super heavy. It has to be somewhat affordable, and the focal length has to make sense in practical use. So while everybody probably wants a 2000mm lens that's super bright, I don't think anybody that I know can afford one of those, so 150 to 600 is a good compromise. The lens does have a little bit of a restricted aperture, most likely to keep the price and weight down. It's at f6.3 on the long end. At 600mm and at 150mm, it opens up to f5. Like most of these mid-price super telephoto lenses, this one's going to struggle a little bit when we get into really dark situations, particularly with moving subjects. And in photography, we get a little bit of help when we're doing videography because the frame rate determines the shutter speed, and it's usually much slower, allowing us to shoot at a lower ISO. We'll look at some examples here in just a second. And I found with the really great, cameras are getting really good at high ISO imagery, and the denoising features of a lot of popular software is getting pretty good. So a lot of shots, even shooting at ISOs that I would have considered completely unusable a few years ago, were able to get some usable imagery even in really low light. On one of my first photo walks this year, it was a particularly warm day after it had been cold for a while, I decided to go to a local preserve. It's a pretty large preserve, and I noticed on an earlier walk a pair of muskrat lodges. It'd been warm enough that I figured the ice had probably broken up a little bit and we might be able to see them playing around, and I was right. I was greeted by, I think there was between 9 and 12 of them every time I stopped by. Muskrats are an animal that really doesn't get moving until right around sunset and sometimes a little bit after. These are in a pretty protected area and sometimes they play a little bit earlier, but usually getting good clean shots of them moving around is really hard in low light, particularly when you have a restricted aperture. That said, I was able to get some good video and photo examples while I was out shooting, and considering the low light, particularly the video, I think looks really good. On a different part of that same preserve, there's a bald eagle nest. Now, these birds are really big. They can have wingspans up to 7.5 feet. And consequently, their nests are really big. And this time of year where the deciduous trees don't have any leaves in them, it's really easy to find the nests. They are federally protected, and this one is marked. You can't get really close to them. And that's to safeguard them as they are raising their young. This set has had a clutch of eggs every year in the last several years, so it's really fun to watch them be parents. On this day, it was super windy, and I did have a lighter weight tripod, so I did add some stabilization in post. The stabilization on this lens has been really solid, particularly in photography, but with a lightweight tripod, you're probably going to have to stabilize if you're in really high winds. It was a long enough walk from the parking lot that I didn't want to carry a big heavy studio tripod around. But all things considered, I think the video clip came out pretty good. So the next couple of shots, I'm going to show both the out-of-camera shot and then a slightly edited shot, show you what's capable with adding a little noise reduction in post. The first example is from a pretty small wetland preserve in town. I was out one day looking for owls and noticed what at first I thought was a dog out in the middle of the lake, and it turned out it was a group of 3 coyotes. It was getting really dark, and this image was shot at 8,000 ISO. Only cropping has been applied to this first image. And then I took that same image, brought it through Adobe Camera Raw, applied a little noise reduction, added some contrast, boosted the color a little bit, and we got to this, which I think is a usable image. On a different photo walk on a different day, just before sunset, I came across a couple big groups of white-tailed deer. And again, I didn't have a lot of light, so this is shot at about 6400 ISO. And unlike the last shot, I think it looks okay. I'm not one to fuss over a little bit of grain. I'm a student of the film era, so grain in high ISO is just kind of a normal thing to me. But the last image where I thought it probably wasn't usable without a little cleaning up in post, this one might be. That said, again, I walked this image through Adobe Camera Raw, cleaned it up with some noise reduction, added some contrast and that kind of thing, and I think it looks pretty good. Walking back to my car well after the sun had set, and it was really dark. My eyes struggle a little bit in low light, so as I was walking back to my car, I just thought I saw a little bit of movement out of the corner of my eyes. Sat, let my eyes adjust, and saw some deer way off across a little clearing that's near the parking lot, and decided, hey, my camera's still out, I still have my tripod up, why don't I try to get a video here? I was having a little trouble getting a good lock with the autofocus, so I switched it over to manual focus with the handy switch and just dialed it in and got this clip. And it is amazingly dark. Like, I could not see very much with the naked eye. So I'm really impressed with how this turned out. In my last lens review, I started giving lenses a Jeff score, and we're going to do that here. Once I have a couple more examples, I'll start putting up a leaderboard so we can see how lenses compare to each other. For image quality, I think this lens is going to get an 8 out of 10. It does struggle in low light a little bit, so noisy images can reduce image quality a little bit. But as long as the light's good, this is pretty solid, particularly considering its price tag. For ease of use, I'm also going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's a little heavy, but aside from that, there's a lot of great features on this lens. It's got a built-in Arca Swiss plate in the lens foot, so you don't have to remember to mount a new plate to it if you're using an Arca Swiss compatible tripod head. And features like the adjustable tension and focal limiter, I think, make this a really easy lens to use in most situations. For overall value, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10, a little bit lower. It is cheaper than the 200 to 600 from Sony, not a ton cheaper, but it is cheaper, and it's quite a bit more expensive than the Tamron 150 to 500. I know you're getting 100 less millimeters there, but back in the DSLR days, the Sigmas were quite a bit more, and at that point Tamron did have a 150 to 600, which I think is a fairly similar lens. So I think 7 out of 10 is a fair score. So the Sigma 150 to 600 Sport comes in at 23 out of 30 on the Jeff score. And that's really good. After months of testing, this has become my go-to lens for capturing wildlife imagery. I do enjoy carrying my Micro Four Thirds stuff a little bit more just because of the weight, but the image quality here is really exceptional. If you've had an opportunity to use this lens or have any questions, please share them in the comments section. Good luck on your art journey, and we'll see you next time.